itself. If you feel like things feel natural, obviously a lot of the stuff is probably going to be fairly rough in the sense of like not everything might be, animated. So just look at what's there and kind of again look at the overall motion and stuff, and see how like camera angles work, that kind of thing. But yes, I do like how you've sort of like subbed in like this is what will be happening here. That does help. But yeah, so does anyone have any thoughts and comments? Again, looking at, oh, that would be so annoying with IK arms. Was that annoying? Okay. Personal preference. I really hate IK arms. But yeah, so does anybody have any thoughts and comments on any of the existing animations so far? I feel like it's definitely, I like this. Is this little star sticker?
Yes, it is.
That's delightful. I mean, it definitely seems like the environment and stuff is like fairly well blocked in this, which is nice to see. And then it also seems like wait, where am I going? It seems like the stuff, especially like sort of towards the beginning of things, is like fairly refined. Like I didn't notice a lot of like super crazy IK popping or like really weird sort of other glitches. One thing I would suggest is and this goes for just like in general, it's always good, so like particularly for areas like his torso down here, if that always is like tiny bit of secondary motion, because it's actually really bizarre. Like even if you're standing like perfectly at attention and trying to be as still as possible, if you were to like film a person and sort of go back and look at how they're moving, they are always kind of swaying slightly. So that would be definitely a good thing to go back in and throw in. Because again, it seems like a lot of this is like pretty refined and like pretty far. That's a nice rose. Pretty far along in the sort of animating process. So like I think that would be a good thing to go through and add some more refinement to things. Let's see. This is such a weird. He just has like a really tiny pelvis. Like the jock dude. It was a really funny little fetal position. Wait. Wait, did you say he's a Dorito? But yeah. Cool. Alright. But yeah, so I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts and comments? Like, any also thoughts again on like camera angle, things like that? I feel like the thing where the jock is looking at himself in the mirror, it feels like maybe his head should be more in frame.
It got cut off. Yeah, mine got cut off too. Yeah, I think it would have just been, I don't know what it was.
Maybe like play blast settings kind of thing?
No,
or like
in post when they're putting together, the sizes might have been different.
Oh, I see.
Like in mine, like
Gotcha.
his head in the second one, like it's in frame, but then it gets like completely cut off.
Gotcha. Interesting.
So where's his head?
Most unusual. Oh, like okay. So like his head was supposed to be in frame there. That does make sense. Interesting.
It's in frame on like the separate play glass.
Gotcha. So I think that might just be a thing of like make sure, I don't know what render settings everyone uses, but like make sure you set it to the like render when you I can just do the thing in Maya. Make sure you use for display size from render settings and have that set to the 1920 by 1080, and that should eliminate all the weird stuff where like maybe the frames would be different sizes. But yeah, so I mean, do you guys want to look at the, what am I saying? I like the like crazy hip popping that she has. Like it's a very sassy walk. I think actually for that sassy walk, you could maybe even exaggerate it a little bit more and have some swing, like it seems like her hip is mostly sort of like going like this.
It goes to the front a tiny bit.
Yeah.
It's noticeable, like, from the side or like
Mm-hmm.
from
I feel like,
exaggerated.
yeah, like I think if that was exaggerated, so it was like really like coming forward and she was almost doing like a crazy catwalk strut or something like that might be a fun way. But I mean, even now, you definitely get the sort of sass in it, which is cool. Do you guys want to take a look at the individual animations for stuff like the head, or do you care? Like since some of the heads and stuff got cut off. Okay. Ooh. Do you actually show writing?
Yes.
Oh god. All right, I'm just gonna go in random order of whichever ones I find these from. I don't know. I think some people are at GDC, but I don't know how many. It's the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. They do like a Drexel like chooses a team to represent them every year. So I know like
3.5 groups here.
yeah, I have actually no idea. But yeah, so I mean, I think with this, it's pretty much just sort of like keep working. Who made the flower, by the way? That does look really nice. The flower is
Wait, I
nice.
haven't even seen it. Where is it?
The flower, it's like floating around. It like, dang it. It comes in for like a few frames.
Yes, there they are. I was just like, where do I share it things? And yeah, I'll have to figure that out. But my goodness.
Fair enough.
The dog is supposed to be fetal position.
Oh,
Like the arms.
I read it as, it reads as fetal position. It just looks weird because of his body proportions. But that's fine. I wonder, maybe there would be some kind of like alternative way, like if you felt like that position looked really weird, if there was another alternative sitting position you could use that would make him look sad. Like I'm thinking maybe he's just like sitting cross-legged on the floor, like with his hands on his arm or like on his knees. Just face planted and depressed on the floor. Ow. I feel like that might look like he's dead. Or like
I know what we were going for though. Really my heart rate, but
I think you're going for more of like a soul death, not so much as like he's actually dead. But yeah, I mean that might be worth looking into going and just playing around for like 10 or 15 minutes, putting him in some different poses and seeing if there is something that, because like I said, I think that definitely reads, it just looks weird because of his body proportions, which is like shrugs, but totally up to you for that. But yeah, and then I think like, so it seems like she's sort of like the most refined out of all the robot animations. I think definitely also go in at some point when you're refining and like add, like I mentioned before, what is happening to my voice? Every week, it's only for this class that this happens. But go through and just add some more like wiggle and stuff to her torso so that there's always like a slight motion there. But yeah, cool. All right, I'm gonna grab this one. Live, darn it. I do like the thumbnails and I can actually like recognize whose stuff is whose. Oh my god. Play. Oh, wait, am I just playing this 8,000 times? What? What? Let's try. Good morning. Hello. We'll mark you for attendance. Windows Media Player. Recommended settings? Haha! It's alive! I thought he was about to pick his nose for a minute, and I was very... Alright, now that I see his head for that, I think it might... Ah, yes, you do have a wise camera angle, so you don't need to deal with, like, actually seeing it. I also love how he's holding the pencil like a toddler, where he's just like...
I tried, and like, cause the way his thumb bent, it wouldn't go that way. So I was like, I can hold it this way.
Yep. But I think it's kind of funny and charming. Also, it's a nice. This is a dumb detail, but I really enjoy the wax seal. It looks nice and puffy and waxy. I think this, where he's doing the like, where am I? What's happening with my glasses bit, is maybe like if you could make him shakier looking, it almost looks like he's doing a mime routine right now, where because he's just like his hands are like plants, and then he's like I like how his arms spaz out. Was that intentional or?
I mean,
kind of,
because in my reference, I kind of went, oh.
Okay. It does make a funny effect. But yeah, so I might try to, words. I might try to sell that a little bit more in terms of like, making him, I know you have like functioning eyelids and stuff in there. Can you make him squint?
Yeah, I didn't get the time to do that.
That's fine.
But yeah, he's definitely gonna like have more facial.
Yeah. But yeah, I think squinting would definitely help, and then maybe do a little bit more of like, where is he? Yeah. Which is why it's one of those weird, like, I know what's happening in this. It still feels mimey to me right now, which is kind of funny, but also like a little bit confusing if you maybe don't know what's happening there. I like all the camera angles that you guys have done, just like in general. And then it seems like, I also like the sad cutouts for the doors. Like that's such a my middle school thing, and I was like, ugh, takes me back. But like there's a lot of like actual just like nice environmental stuff in here where I'm like not even looking at the environment because it's just like in a state of like nice refinement with the models. There was an area where he like raises his hand, which I feel like was maybe a little bit.
That one was meant for like the one before the scene's gonna be when like the jock is flexing, and then the nerd season is like. Ooh.
Okay.
But I feel like the hand, like I make my hands go like this, and it should be more like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that would help to have him be like more like and like. I think maybe like speed it up a little bit as well, and it might. Some of that might be like when he has like some more facial stuff done to it, it might kind of like negate whatever comments I'm making now. But like, it felt a little bit slow. So is that the one where he's going for like, ooh, like Jock has muscles, or is it like okay? So it's
his eyelids like no, not his eyelids, like the pupils almost like it's hard to see because his eyes, like his whole eyes the same color. If you really look close to it, you could see them.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yes, I did see. That's funny. Yeah. Or maybe you could also maybe even do something with the eyebrow, because like you just want to make sure that it reads. I think that the pupils dilating definitely helps with like an ooh, but you want to make sure it reads as what you want and not like fear or something weird like that. And I was even thinking, this seems out of character for me. You can even make the eyebrows do like kind of thing, where they like go up. But that seems more like a thing the jock would do and not the nerd bot. Cool. I also like that you gave him bolt ears to hold the glasses. That was nice. But yeah, I mean, this seems like going pretty well. Have you guys mostly been doing, have you guys mostly just been animating your own robots for this, or?
Yes.
Fair. That's honestly probably what I would do if I was picking stuff up. Wait, is this the?
No, I just did the whole first scene.
Okay, gotcha. That was nice with where the fingers sort of had a little bit of like curl after they let go of the locker. But yeah, so I mean, I think the same comments for this as the other ones. Like, it seems like just sort of, keep working on stuff and then like go through and make sure there's no areas where the torso or something like that is just like completely stationary. But yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely starting to look good. It seems like, in general, there's a nice sort of relationship between the characters in terms of like how they touch, like how they interact with each other, and like, the picking up and putting down of objects, things like that. Um, but yeah. Cool. All right. All right. So, wait, is Daniel or his group member here? Anywhere? Okay, sweet. So I can't keep track of like who's actually in whose team. This is quite charming. Okay, so is this? All right, hang on. So this is just Daniel's stuff. Is there? Wait. Is there? Ivan, do you have stuff of yours in here? Oh yeah, sorry, you said that. Okay, cool. Do you have any interest in? I didn't see. Daniel's not here, is he? Okay, that's what I didn't think he was. All right. I mean, do you want to just go over his stuff really quick and just sort of get feedback for like general group stuff, or?
Sure.
Cool. All right. So this is the robot training, basically like training montage where he gets the crap beat out of him by a bigger robot. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before he gets beat up.
Fair enough. This is gonna need to be like the most adorably short, pudgy bench to accommodate this guy's tiny legs. But yeah, so anybody have any thoughts and comments on the existing animation here? Did you just dab?
No, it's like the flexing thing that they do. Like that, so trying to flex. That's supposed to be the bigger robot's leg.
Gotcha. It might be. I almost want to see for the flex. So like, I think that definitely needs to read as a flex. So I'm curious to see other people's opinions on this because like I was like, is this a dab? Did anybody else read it like that or like have trouble sort of interpreting what was happening?
This part?
With the yeah.
It looks like a flex, but what you could do, more like flex, is like kind of make it vibrate a little bit. And straight.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking too, especially for the one where both of his arms are sort of like curved down towards his stomach and he's like doing that like muscle pose or whatever. Like if there was like a little bit of sort of like shaking or trembling with the arms, I think that would definitely sort of help get that idea across. A little bit of IK popping in the arms there, it looks like. Maybe. And then the other thing I was thinking, so I think part of the thing that makes this look a little bit weird is it might be due to sort of like the robot's head shape and it's like interfering with the pose in the sense that like normally I think this arm would be bent like curved upwards like this, but I think it, right, like is that's the thing where you're like but I think the head is in the way. I was almost thinking it would be funny to put in like, I don't even know if this would make sense with a robot, but like you could do sort of, if you wanted to show like a physical change in his arms, I don't know if that would make sense or not, it might be kind of funny. You could either do like a blend shape and just add like a little bit of like bulging to his muscles, which would be kind of weird, or you could just switch out his arms to have physically beefier arms. So I'm thinking for that, it would basically just be like add a second piece of geometry in here, and instead of having, wait for it, instead of having it like have obvious ball joints and then like a small taper, just have it be like a big rounded like muscle lump or something weird. I don't know if that makes sense, but it is conceivably a more sort of like physical way to show the muscles like within the model. But yeah, I think like was said before, I think the sort of shaking or like the straining of the muscles would definitely help with selling those poses. Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts, comments on anything? Wait, that last bit was like where he got kicked, or what was that you said?
No, he's gonna get punched.
Ah, okay, so he's like cowering in advance.
Maybe it'd be funnier if he got punched after dabbing.
He just goes out on stage and he's like making muscles and then he just gets kicked. Breaks through the wall. Was that supposed to be like jogging in place?
I forget if it was jogging in place or if it was on a treadmill.
Okay. I think for that, it seems like the motions of everything are like at a decent point, just like need a little bit more refining. I think the thing where he's jogging in place, I think this would also be good for some like additional muscle strain. Like it feels like his arms are going up and down like really, really fast. So I think if that was like a little bit slower, and again, just add like a little bit of vibration for, to show like straining, that would help. And then for the running in place, either the like running in place or the treadmill, definitely there could be a little bit more sort of torso movement to that, in the sense that it looked like, every time I try to find it, I can't find it. But it seems like he's sort of very, like, his whole core of his body, like his main little body brick and his head are pretty much staying in place, and then his arms and legs are sort of just like moving individually. So even if you're running on a treadmill or doing something like that, like there definitely would be some translation and rotation values to that torso. I think that's actually one of the main things that I would look at in terms of just sort of like refining going forward, is like make sure stuff like that looks reasonable. And then again, same comments as I've been sort of doing generically, is like it's always good to have like the body should always be sort of moving slightly and never just totally stationary in one spot. Again, ditto for like some torso movement here, a little bit of rotation, something like that would help sort of make that feel a little bit more natural. But yeah, so I think most of this is just sort of like keep refining stuff. I do think it's a very silly, charming robot. It definitely did get several aw when it opened up. It's always cool seeing robots like come alive and sort of get more personality. Cool. Anyone else have any thoughts, comments on this? All right. Cool. All right. So we have. Yes. Is this?
Yeah, so just a disclaimer about this. There are a couple of scenes missing because the play blasts, like I have them and I can play them in VLC, but when I try bringing them into Premiere to like compile them, they give me a whole bunch of problems.
Oh, that's
and
fun.
Also, if I try bringing it into like media coder to like so there are like two scenes that aren't in there.
Fair enough.
And it's also small because I did this at like 3 in the morning, and that's how it feels, and I wasn't about to fix it. So.
Fair enough. What is this hanging out of the dumpster?
It's just a random cloth.
Fair. It looks like legit curtains just on a dumpster.
They're supposed to be holding batteries here.
Okay.
But, like, they're not there yet.
Fair enough. I love the functionality to spin the arms. It's one of my favorite things about ball joints on robots, is you can do the like full 360 spins. What is this supposed to be like, looking on top of a trash pile?
Yeah. So
Okay.
Like, he's in the distance, and then the other robots in the foreground. But like, yes.
Okay. Make sure they're actually sitting on the ground for the final cuts. It looks kind of like they're floating. Oh my.
His knees are very gross.
Oh my. What happened to his knees? Was it just like a weird IK thing, or?
There's an updated version where they're fixed.
Fair enough. Plot twist, he broke his legs in penance for killing his friend. Alright, is this card barbed wire in the background?
No, that's like very paper thin and weird, but it looks better in the render, I swear.
Gotcha. That actually might be. I mean, I was just curious. It might actually be easier to do that if you're ever doing this like in the future, to just model like one link of it and then just sort of procedurally duplicate it and reattach it together. I don't know. I also just find deformers like really hard to work with personally, but again, personal preference. But yeah, so anybody have any thoughts and comments on existing animation? Anybody? Wait, say again? Mm.
He has like aperture eyes, and Elliot made like a controller aperture eyes.
Yeah, they're just so I just like model each segment of the aperture, and then I have the controller connected to it's just a German key connected to their position.
Okay. Because I wanted to do that,
I did make, so I think yours were like individual pieces. I do have like a crappy video on like how to make a janky blend shape version of aperture eyes. Fair enough. But yeah, there's a few different ways to do that. Most of them involve sort of set driven keys. I feel like that's just a piece of shrapnel, isn't it? Like at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I have two notes for that. One, make sure, because it's a pretty tiny piece of shrapnel. Make sure that when you render this, it's visually obvious, if that makes sense. Like, otherwise it might not be clear like what they're throwing back and forth. So make sure, maybe it's shiny enough or like the contrast is such that you can see it. I'd also maybe give that a little bit more speed.
Yeah, the like motion path is a work in progress.
Fair enough. It's also a weird thing to animate, because like I kind of remember your reference and it looks like you were sort of throwing gently because you were like in an area with like things you didn't want to break, which makes sense. It's always like weird to animate for that because then you're like, okay, how do I make this look more forceful and angry? One thing you could conceivably do, A, is just, speed up the arm motions and like place them farther apart. You could also, I almost wonder if maybe there was a thing, and this is more like sort of seeing it in retrospect, but like what if, the thing where you like toss a water balloon to someone and then if they catch it you take a step back and then you throw it and you keep sort of like getting farther apart. Again, this is probably maybe scope creep, but like that potentially could justify them sort of throwing it faster or harder or like aggressively losing control to the point where someone gets stabbed with a shrapnel. I do like, I like how it was like, bzz, it just gets like sucked into his hand. And then that I assume he was supposed to have the shrapnel like in his stomach for. Or no, wait.
Well, I had trouble turning like the visibility of like that piece off when I was animating it, so I like point blasted it with it
Oh, just,
like on his hand, but that's not supposed to be like that.
okay.
But it's supposed to theoretically like bounce off of his like impale and like fall on the ground like after it hits him in the battery component.
Okay. So it hits him and then it bounces off of him.
Yeah.
Okay. It almost might be cool, because like there was the bit, and it's just because I'm being a dingus, it's not Blueface guy that gets stabbed, right?
No, it's the
Blueface guy?
well, Blueface guy does the stabbing.
Yes, okay, that's what I thought. Okay. So it's Aperture Eye guy that gets shrapnel stabbed.
Yes.
Okay. There was a bit in the beginning where it looked like he was sort of going around and, what am I saying? It almost looked like he was like, oh no, like I have been stabbed, where he was like emoting at his chest. It might actually be nice visually if you weren't planning on having a shot of the shrapnel like stabbing him and then falling out, like specifically showing that, to just have it sticking out of his chest and he'll just be like, ah! And then he'll like pull it out. But I think either way, were there plans to sort of show that, or?
I think the current plan is to show like the crack
Yeah.
or something.
So like right there when he like kind of backs up and is like, oof, like
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking at least like the, you see it like hit him in the chest.
Okay.
So you like can't catch it, but like again that's not like
Right.
animated yet.
Right. That's fair. So I think there's a few different ways to make that more impactful, pun kind of intended. Either show the shrapnel in him or more visually show the shrapnel hitting him, like you've mentioned. And also that there's like the moment when the shrapnel, like he sort of like takes a step or two back, move the shrapnel faster and make him backpedal harder. So like really make him like, I was gonna say have someone hit you in the stomach. I'm like, don't do that. But like, I imagine that'd be like a pretty forceful thing. So it might be good. Watch some action movie reference and see like how people respond when they get punched. Because it seems like it could be a more sort of exaggerated motion, which I think would also sort of help sell the like direness of that. And then my other question was, how are you gonna show? So is it?
Yeah, so there's a missing scene where they like walk over and they're tired and they sit down and
Yeah.
fall asleep. Which that's the one that I like kind of played last in the
Fair. I was actually going to ask, how are you going to show the broken battery? Like, is it going to be sort of like a glowing light that's like cracked and maybe it's like flickering, or like what were you visually planning on doing to show the brokenness of the battery?
Well, so the battery has like an indicator light on it.
Okay.
That will maybe be like flickering or dim, or like there might be green sections and some like red sections when it gets hit.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
I was also going to say, so I mean, if you're looking for like a super obvious visual, if it was like some kind of, I'm looking at like this little chest bubble thing. If that was just like a light that was cracked with like an actual crack mark in it, that would probably be like a really, really obvious visual if you wanted to sort of go that route.
Yeah.
Also actually strangely easy to accomplish. You would just sort of take if you Google like crack pattern, like glass crack pattern, you can just throw that on as a bump map pretty much and it'll make like that little chipped effect. But yeah, so I mean that would be I think the other thing, like make it really, really obvious that guy is in pain. And then I remember at one point you had different, or it was like a plan of doing like a montage where they're sort of like walking and then like the hit battery guy gets sort of like more tired as he goes along. Is that still the plan, or was that?
Yes.
Okay.
That is still the plan. That's also not in there yet.
Fair.
The backgrounds are all going to be done in post. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay. Did I mention last week that you could use MASH to populate trash piles with like bikes and old random objects? Okay. Also, you could totally, this feels like one of the things where it's like if you have other, I know you have some like World War II bottles and stuff from your CGI class where like you could just reuse a bunch of them and just populate bottles into your scene. So totally just like grab stuff you have and then you can just make weird trash piles with it. I do like the sort of dumpster that you have. It might be, and this is a weird tiny thing. It might be good to drape this slightly differently. It really looks like a curtain. Maybe, what?
I said okay.
Again, this is my weird, you could totally just like hide that or texture it. It just like right now it's white so it stands out really, really aggressively.
I was like, this is very great.
I think, honestly, a really quick and easy way to fix that, I think, would just be drop the cloth from a different angle so that it's like sticking out as a triangle instead of like a sheet, basically.
Yeah.
And then you could texture it so it looks beat up as just, rip some chunks out of it or something, and I think that would help sell it. Or you could just turn it into a rug and call it a day. Just literally just have like a fancy Persian rug in a trash can. But yeah, I mean, it seems like the sort of base animation is good in the sense that like there's definitely like motion happening with the characters. For stuff like that, again, my generic comment about like the chest and stuff should always be moving. I think most of the comments would actually just be like some of the stuff seems a little bit slow and could get speeded up. It's like some of the sort of like walking. I think where am I going? No. So like this bit here, it feels a little bit sort of like pose to pose. Basically meaning like I can tell like he goes from standing up and then he sort of like hits that down pose and you can kind of like see all the keyframes lining up. So it might be good. I think the existing, like the animation itself and the movement is fine. If you just sort of went through and like staggered some of the keyframes so that like the arms came to rest at like a different frame from the rest of the body, that would honestly fix a lot of that. I do like the posing. It's so creepy. But I really like the posing of this guy here. He looks pretty dead and pretty pitiful. I almost feel like his head could be lolling. Like, and again, this is a strange, tiny thing. I like the position he's sitting in. I feel like the angle of that is strange. Like, it feels like he should be falling over into his friend at that angle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out like how to work out how he was sitting against the wall.
Yeah.
So I guess like the angle of that is still like in progress, but like that is the thought, I guess.
I mean, if you could honestly just rotate him slightly so that his back is like more on the wall.
Yeah.
The other thing that might be kind of depressing if you were shooting for that, and it seems like you guys kind of are, is have him die against his friend. Like, have him, because I'm also thinking, like, practically speaking, if you rip your battery out, you probably have very limited time to, like, get that installed into your friend, and then you're just going to collapse immediately. So, like, what if he was just, like, sitting against the wall, pretty much in the same position he's in now, but, like, his back would be on the wall, and he was, like, just tilted slightly into his friend, so, like, the friend could even wake up with, like, the guy leaning into him, and he's like, hey, what's, oh, shit. But yeah. And then it seems like maybe there was just some more animation that like was planning on getting done to the other body. Yeah, fair enough. This piece of shrapnel also looks like a giant nail or like a tiny sub.
It's supposed to be a railroad spike.
Nice. I like the specificity of that. I'd totally buy that as a railroad spike, actually. My god, why are they playing with a railroad spike? For the walk here, it seems like it's actually moving in like a stop motion-y kind of way, which is kind of cool. What was I gonna say though? So it looks like there's a little bit of like stretching and eye popping in the legs, and I think the easiest way to fix that would actually be to sort of launch the character through the air more, like make both of their feet come off the ground at once. It seems like it's like a weird hybrid right now between like a walk where, you know, one foot is like always on the ground, and a run where he's like moving faster and he like wants to be running but he's still kind of walking. But yeah. Cool. Anyone else have any thoughts, comments on stuff? What was that? I like still really like the little hand flippy thing. What was he supposed to be doing there?
So in both of his hands, he's gonna have like batteries, and he's kind of like comparing them to his own.
Ah, gotcha.
So he's like,
Gotcha. Cool. That makes sense. I think it might also, I mean, I assume this will be more obvious again when there's like actual stuff in his hand. It might be, you might consider like holding it closer to his chest battery, just as like a very obvious visual of like, I am comparing these. But again, to be decided later. Cool. I like the sad antennas. Any other thoughts, comments on any of this? All right. Cool. And then we have. Cool. Do we have? Ferris, do we have the group submission for this anywhere, or is it just this? All right. What? Okay. Question mark? If not, we'll just look at them separately. I said if there's, is this the group one or is this? Okay, sweet. And I actually completely don't remember. Are you guys are going for low poly, it looks like, for your assets?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. And then, am I remembering correctly? Are you guys doing the one where it's like a sword fight, like in a forest?
No.
Okay.
The one where it's like there's a sniper.
Ah, yes. Okay. Okay, so this is the one with like Killbot chasing the guy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, there's like a lot of fight scenes that I can't remember whose is whose. Okay. Cool. So any thoughts and comments about what's there for animation for now? All right. Do I need to call in a random person? Sure.
On the side of the gun, there's like a track where the bullet is supposed to be pushing in. But I don't know why I can't move it. I was gonna actually ask her about that.
Fair.
You can't move it into that one, so that's what it's supposed to be like, he's pushing it in.
Okay. Cool.
Something that could comfort that I don't know much about guns, but I know that like when you refill them, you could have like a physical pack that like shows that. That's just an idea, but overall, I think overall your animation is like pretty smooth. I would say, what kind of for this robot, does he know that he's like being watched, like, and also walking out on the city streets, like all alone? If that makes sense. Do you think he would have a more relaxed walk, or he would be like looking around a little bit more? Because he looks relaxed, and then he's looking behind his back. So maybe making him a bit more stiff, a little bit more like watchful would be appropriate instead of walking like he's going like he's going to somewhere else in like the dead of day.
It's gonna be night though, too.
I can see. Were you setting up like creepy lighting with the street lamps?
Yeah.
Nice. I do agree. That's actually is a fair point. So is there? I don't remember who was talking about doing audio cues. Were you talking about doing any audio cues for this, or no? No is totally acceptable. Okay. The reason I ask is because to me, it looked like there's like the time where he like turns around, and it seems like it would be like, you know, he hears like a mysterious rattling of like a trash can behind him or something like that. And to me, it looked like he was responding to an audio cue. So what is he responding to there? Just like.
More just like he's looking around trying to make sure no one's following him.
Okay. Why?
He doesn't know that there's someone trying to kill him with a sniper, but he's like knows that that's like the idea.
Okay.
We were gonna put like that one shot where he walked through the like this shot like on the wall like a walk through those two.
Okay. Yeah, so that was gonna be my next question. Like, is there? So I do remember you pitching the poster actually now. So apart from the poster, is there any other sort of things to indicate that he would be more suspicious? Like, I almost feel like.
Probably. I mean, I don't know if this would necessarily be, but like I'm laying detection at 4 p.m. I don't assume that would happen. That's right.
Yeah. I don't know if that would help with the motivation, but I definitely think that would sort of help with the sort of character himself. I also I really enjoy this ridiculous ponytail. Like, it's, something about it is like cool to me, and I also like his weird little head hatch, where it's just like you can very clearly see that is at some point supposed to open. Does it ever open, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Sweet. And
But yeah, so I think sort of, I guess, building off what Annie was saying, it might be nice. I definitely like the idea of the wanted poster. So I'm just imagining that that's sort of like chilling on the wall next to him. It might be good if he sees that and like acknowledges it. Maybe he looks at it or something like that, and then as he's walking, he has a little bit more of like a sort of paranoid air to him, I guess. Because it does seem like, and again, like obviously we're missing some of the wanted poster props and stuff, but right now his walk sort of seems more like leisurely strolling down the street, and then all of a sudden he like becomes paranoid. So I think if there was some more build up to that, in terms of like showing that he understands sort of what's going on, that would definitely sort of help sell his motivation, I guess, in general. I'm also very excited for the like spotlight lighting here. That should be fun. And actually, out of curiosity, what are you rendering this in?
We don't know yet. Yeah.
Fair enough. The reason I ask is because I can't speak to game engines, but if you're looking for like an actual spotlight shape, Redshift, you can turn an area light into a spotlight.
So yeah, we can put the Redshift.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, you can make the shape in a bajillion different programs. It might just be slightly easier in Redshift compared to Arnold, and again, can't speak to Unity at all. But yeah, so I mean, I do agree, like a lot of it seems like there's definitely good starts to like a lot of the walk cycles and stuff. They feel like they're sort of definitely getting to a sort of natural state. I think what I would do, there's like a few areas where like maybe just like smooth out some of the curves of the animation, like the head is like a little bit bobby back and forth, like kind of here it's like a little bit jittery. And I would also focus on going through and just like tweaking. So there's ever so slight occasional IK popping of the legs. If you took the torso, or no, sorry, not the torso, the pelvis, and you rotated that slightly, sort of forward and back, that would help fix the IK popping and make the walk feel more fluid. So I would definitely say go back and do some of that. Sort of serves two purposes in this case. But yeah, I like this overhead shot. Just cool looking. And what was? Is this for the eighth time? Is this you guys or a different group that I'm thinking of? Were you doing the like floating city in the sky thing? Okay, I got it right. How is that still the plan, or like how's that going?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Establishing shot, it just wasn't the right size and resolution. For some reason, we didn't want to headquarter it to be the same size and resolution as everything else.
Interesting.
So I just left it out.
Gotcha.
I've got it though.
But yeah, it shows it also like the part where like zip line between two platforms.
Interesting. I'm excited for the ziplining bit. Cool. But yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely starting to look good. I do really enjoy this like strange little over-the-shoulder shot where it's just like, look at my mouth flap. It's delightful. But yeah, anyone else have any other thoughts, comments on this? All right. Cool. Done this one. Play blast. Is this? I guess this is all of these. All right. That is a really nice bedroom. All right. So is this the whole one or the just?
I think this is the combo.
Okay, cool. That's what I was going for.
Yeah. And we didn't do any of the camera shots for it yet because most of, like we have them laid out, we just didn't do all of them for every shot.
Gotcha.
Because most of it utilizes the whole room.
Fair enough. Okay, so mostly just looking at the actual animation itself. Oh my god. I love it. So mostly just looking at the animation itself for now. Where's the door in this room?
So it's actually, I took the wall with the door off of it just for this shot.
Oh, okay.
See everything with it. There is like a wall, the door is like on that wall. There's like a little hallway almost. That
Okay.
So
Cool.
there's one, we just can't see it.
Okay, so the plan, I guess, is to, going back to what you were saying about ignore the camera angles for now, to just, eventually you'll be in the room and,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Plot twist, they actually built the children into a room and they're slowly losing their sanity. I like all that. I really like the molding that you guys have. It's always a nice touch. What is happening here?
Okay, so that robot's supposed to like crawl underneath the desk.
Yeah.
But I was having so many issues with the hands that I was like, I'm just gonna deal with that later. So that's why I like pushed through. The way I work personally is I do with the legs first and then the arms.
That's what I do.
So I just didn't get to do with the arms that one yet.
No, that's fair. I was mostly just wondering like why he was cowering under the desk.
He's just hiding. We're just like playing around.
Fair enough.
He's gonna like throw some stuff on the air too.
Gotcha.
Like, add some things in there.
So I think what I would say, it would be really cool to get like a little blend shape or like deformer or something. You could even put like a soft body or something, or end cloth. You could put inflated end cloth on the bed. But it'd be cool to get some squish on the bed if you wanted to. I would say a stretch goal, but like it would look cool. The other thing I would say is I would maybe try to introduce some more chaos to this.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably part of your plan in general. So like for the close-up shots where you're doing like all the sword fighting and stuff, I think that's like pretty much fine. But like, I'm thinking specifically like for the guy going and like crawling under the desk thing.
Yeah, I think like what we're probably going to do is we're going to have them all like tossing things.
Yeah.
I just haven't gotten to that point.
Mhm.
So I've just been experimenting with like sizing
Right.
actual movements, but hopefully what we'll have is they're going to like toss toys around and stuff.
Yeah. I'm even thinking, and like that's kind of what I was thinking too, if there's like an obvious barrage of, you know, blocks or something
Yeah.
being thrown and like one hits his head and the guy's like, no.
Yeah.
You could even do, my God. Do you remember there was an episode of SpongeBob where there was a snowball fight? And Squidward like got really crazy and he was like, ah, like crazy fat. You could recreate that with blocks
Okay.
for like maximum chaos.
Yeah.
It might be honestly really annoying to animate, but you'd get so much motion blur, you probably wouldn't even notice if the blocks clip through the hands a little bit. But I mean, you could consider doing something like that if you wanted to just get like really over exaggerated with it. I like the guy's little like floppy legs. Wait, is that an extra leg? What is? Oh no, that's his. Oh, that's his arm. Okay. So I think for the arms in general and stuff. Well, I see you said you were just like didn't really get to them, so I was gonna be like, oh, you should like make them more floppy. Let's just make sure that they're counterbalancing whatever the lower body is doing. And actually, it seems like a lot of these characters have semi-restricted motion in their legs because of the design.
Yeah.
So one thing you might consider is going through and using the arms, like having them be sort of like wobbly and unstable,
Yeah.
and then using the arms to like aggressively and obviously counterbalance that, like make those motions like really, really over-exaggerated whenever you get around to doing them. And then what was I know you were doing like a shadow or something. What was the ultimate plan for the sort of like parental stand-in?
So I think what the ending is going to be is it's going to be like super backlit, so you're not going to see the actual geometry.
Okay.
You're going to probably see like the shadow, hopefully on like the ground or something, and then you're going to see like actually in the room where there's like toys and everything.
Okay.
I just don't think that they managed to get to that point quite yet.
Fair enough. I think like I definitely dig the sort of shadow idea. At some point it might maybe be good to throw in like a little bit of maybe like more complex geometry for that. But yeah, I mean, I think with, you know, backlighting and stuff like that, you can kind of get away with, you know, not like fully fleshing out the robot. The other thing you could do is grab some chunks off of your existing robots and just piece it together, and then you'd have like a pre-built sort of fancy. Honestly, you wouldn't even need to rig it if he's just sort of there.
Yeah.
You could just add like a little bit of parenting or something like that and just give him like a tiny bit of body sway. And I think that would pretty much sell it. It would also give you, with the backlighting, it would sort of like wrap around, potentially around the face, or around the rest of the body and make it like a little bit sort of more visually interesting. And it would be a relatively low effort way to get a sort of higher detail looking model in there.
Yeah.
Cool. Are you? I feel like there needs to be like crazy crayon. What if you did a thing? So I'm like, I feel like the room needs to be like really hardcore trash. And I'm like, you have these lovely giant walls. Perhaps, didn't you do a thing with crayons?
Yeah,
For
I
your-
have some of them on the floor right now because I didn't really know where to place them.
Yeah.
Because they're not really in any of the main
Mhm.
shots, except probably like that one would be able to see them. They're like in the corner right there, so I could have them kind of splayed around the room like throughout as well.
Oh, I was gonna suggest. So you could do, if you wanted to go for like maximum room messiness,
Yeah.
you could almost do like a montage of them sort of like fighting and doing crazy stuff, and then like in the background everything gets progressively crazier. So like even if you don't show it, it'll be like one of those like weird sort of like, here is a passage of time scene.
Yeah.
But then like when the father comes in or whatever, it's just like there's crayon doodles all over the walls. There's like toilet paper draped everywhere, and just like get really really weird with it.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of ways, because it like the whole punchline of this is, I think, it's like two things. It's like, one, they play and they destroy the room, so like the destroying of the room needs to feel sufficient to incur, you know, whatever wrath you want on these characters, and sufficient to sort of break them out of the look we're superheroes thing and be like, we are shamed children now. And then also the second bit where they're, you know, doing this like crazy fighting thing, and then it's like, now we're just crazy little kids. So I think, have you given any more thought to sort of how to sell the idea of their fighting feeling like larger than life kind of thing?
Not recently. I know we mentioned that maybe this whole like sword fight thing, but no, not really addressed it.
Fair enough. So I'll pitch this to everyone. Like, does anyone have any thoughts about like how to sort of like drive home the point that like when kids play, it like feels sort of realer and more grandiose than what's actually happening? If that makes sense. Things that don't involve lots of scope creep.
I think it has to deal with like the camera angle. And
Yeah.
like making things feel bigger than they are, or even making the objects look bigger.
Yeah. I think I was also thinking like if you lowered the camera angle so it seemed like you were looking like they would appear larger because of the camera angle.
Yeah.
That would probably be like the cheapest way to do things. The other thing that you might consider is like there's like two ways to make things feel big in animation.
Yeah.
And it usually involves like large things physically move slower. See like clips from Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
So you could do that where you just like shoot from like an upward camera angle and have them be like, no.
Yeah, like really slow motion.
Yeah, like really, you could even like push the slow-mo, like really weird, exaggerated thing. The other thing, and I'm not sure if this is like actually a good idea. It would require a little bit of retexturing, but I was like, you could do some retextures for the robots where like the sword, like when they pick it up, it's just like a foam sword,
Yeah.
and then you retexture it so it looks like metal, and you give them like, you know, little knight costumes or something like that, like just like a silly texture on top of their body.
Yeah.
That could potentially be a cheap and easy way to like make it feel more grandiose, but I don't know if that would actually read. It might just be confusing.
Yeah.
Also, that does involve more texturing, but. And then I think so. Like, if you wanted to play with the camera angles for the like shoot lower to make them feel larger,
Yeah.
when the father comes in, shoot higher and make them feel tiny and just like surrounded by their pile of crap they've thrown everywhere. It's just a little block. You also might consider using dynamic objects for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
At least, I mean, maybe not for all of it, but it would be pretty potentially low effort to do if you want to just have like a barrage of rocks being thrown or like blocks being thrown from off screen.
Yeah.
You could just make them dynamic objects and just have something smacking them.
Yeah.
And that way you wouldn't need to animate 8,000 objects. But I still think it would be funny to have just like end cloth toilet paper just like flying across. But yeah, cool. Anyone else have any thoughts, comments on this? All right. And I think that seems, oh wait. Is Soren or a teammate here? Soren or teammate? All right. We'll just give this like a really quick look in case they want to come back and poke through, oh wait, this is why I was thinking there's a samurai in bamboo forest. Okay. All right, so there's no actual animation in here, so never mind. All right, that apparently was all the animations. Does anybody have any questions about that? Want to go over anything else before we jump into other stuff? All right. Yes?
If you wanted to do multiple cameras for multiple shots, within a scene, how do you like render them in like splits? If that makes sense.
Oh, so like if you had frames like 1 to 100 and 1 to 25 was like camera 1, and then I literally just went over that last quarter, and I do not remember how to do it. There's two different ways to do it. I think the one that I usually use is render layers. So, all right, really quick, just like quick reminder while I buy myself time to think about things. There's another generic work in progress assignment due next week. Presumably, hopefully, be sort of continuing to work on animations, that kind of thing. Other reminder is that there is 2 more weeks of class and then finals week. So pretty much like 3 weeks theoretically from today, I think is when, I don't know. I sent out an announcement.
We're coming in week 11.
Yes. So there's 10 regular weeks, and then week 11 is come in for finals week.
I was like, I need to finish everything this week and then render next
No. I was like freaking out the other day too, because I'm like, oh my god, you guys only have like 2 weeks. And I'm like, wait, no, there's an extra one, we're good.
Do week 10 then? Because in Black, I remember I was thinking because in Black Rose it said like week 8, week 9, finals week.
Yeah, that was me setting things up before I knew what the schedule was. If there is a week 10, which I suppose there is, I think that, no, the assignments for week 10 was pretty much, sorry, what am I doing? Assignments for week 10 would basically just be the stuff for finals week, if that makes sense. So that was pretty much just submit all your final stuff.
What if you're not done?
No, assigned week 10, due week 11. So like due finals week, yeah. So I think right now we're still technically on like week 8 stuff. So like, yeah. So you should have, next week you'll have another work in progress due, and then the next week is the last week before finals, so then it would just be finish things and turn in your finals. Yes. I think finals is like the 16th-ish of March. Does that make sense? Any other questions on assignment-y things? Okay. If for some reason I've timed things horribly and that's not actually how the quarter is working, I will tack on another work in progress and drop like the lowest 2 out of 5 grades instead of 1 out of 4. But yes, so you were asking about rendering for multiple cameras. So I believe, and again, this is completely crapshoot improv here, trying to remember how to do things. If you go into Windows rendering editors, and I think it's render setup, there's also a button for it right here next to the hypershade. You should be able, and this is going to be like super hideous, sort of janky scene. You should be good to, Physical Skies. All right. Basically, like I said, I think there's an alternate way to do this. This is just usually how I set it up. But basically you make additional render layers and you can create overrides for those layers. So let me just say, all right, like I'll make a new layer. I'll call this like 1, whatever. Once you make a new layer, you need to go in and right-click and do Create Collection. And this is, I believe, where it lets you add in all of your sort of objects or whatever you want to tack in from your scene. So by default, if there's nothing in here, nothing will show up in this render layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch my view. I turned off my main view, which sort of has just everything in it. It's like your generic master view in Maya. So I turn this new layer on, and you'll see there's, again, nothing in it. To add things, why is my outliner over here? To add things to your layer, you would just want to select them in your outliner, and then middle mouse button drag them over here, at which point they should then show up in your layer. So this is important. This is actually kind of a convenient way if you ever want to only render certain pieces of your scene without, you know, deleting a bunch of stuff or like manually hiding things. You can set up render layers for this. But what it also allows you to do, if you go into your render settings, is, yes, the beautiful thing where, wait, oh my god, no. I wish I would save your preferences for like not turning this on perpetually. All right, so what you should be able to do is, you'll notice like right now in your render layer, by default, it's going to be set to master layer, but if you create more layers, they'll show up here. So right now, like you can select layer 1 and basically just render layer 1 instead of your master layer. So like, let me also just throw in like a cone or something like that. Where have you put this thing? All right, so it's also gone through and just like, since I was in this layer, when I added the cone, it was added to this layer. What I'm going to do is actually just remove this cone. So you'll notice like it'll show up. It shows up in the master layer, but not in layer 1. So if I go ahead and I render this, you should be able, again, to sort of tweak. So like, this is rendering layer 1. It doesn't have this cone. If you switch this to master layer, it'll then put that little goofy cone in there. Does that kind of make sense with like the render layers, like how they're set up, things? Okay.
And also, can you set a frame range for
Yes, you can. So you can do lots of weird different things with render layers. So one of them, like you said, is setting a frame range. So if you go in, I'll go into my layer 1. What you can do is just set this up for this. If you want this to be, again, a specific frame range, so we'll just do cameras, make a new random camera, camera 1. So what you can do is, if you right-click on pretty much any of these settings, it should do pull up these little options for layer overrides. So I think it's a relative layer override you want to do, but if you turn that on, it'll highlight this orange, basically saying, hey, this is different from my other render layers. And then you could say like, hey, render from frame 5 to frame 15. And then if you made a additional layer with some stuff in it, you do need so like if you want your stuff to show up, you would need to add stuff like lights to all of your layers. Otherwise, again, they won't actually show up. Make a collection, add some stuff to it. Oh god, I've done something horrible with parenting. I just don't know what I did. Ugh, gross. Okay. So then if you go into like this new layer 2 we've made, again, you can create a relative layer override and then just do from frame like 1 to 4 or something like that from your perspective camera. So theoretically, if we were to, I forgot the ground. Theoretically, if we were to render this, it would render the perspective camera from frames 1 to 4, and then the camera 1 from frames 5 to 15. You might need to also override that. But basically, it would just be going and creating a bunch of different layers for things, and then going and just manually setting up the time frame for each layer. Does that make sense? Sweet. I'll probably, that's actually good. I'm going to put a note things to that. Somebody actually also mentioned, and I forgot about this, there was like some issues with Skelebot, so I'm going to tweak him, so I think he like needs to scale better or something like that, and I'll update those files.
So I'll do that and then make a more cohesive thing for layer overrides and stuff like that from this. The other thing you can do that's kind of cool, and this, I might be going insane for this. There is a way, I've not tried to do it in a while, but there is a way to change the material of objects for specific layers only, which is like kind of cool and kind of handy. Like every once in a while, you know, maybe if you're trying to make like a little green screen layer or something like that to like, you know, comp something out of your scene, you can do that. All right, so clearly I have completely forgotten how to do that, but there is a way to do it and it's pretty cool. I'll look into that as well and get back to you. Again, helpful in a small range of instances, but yeah. You can, what I will say is you can also go through, if you like have this p-sphere and you want to maybe mess with how it behaves in your different render layers. Where am I going? Ah, so much stuff in here. Surface, p-sphere shape. All right, so if you go down like to your Arnold stats or something like that, if you wanted to set this opaque in some layers and not opaque in others, you can also right-click and, again, make another override so that in one layer it's going to register as opaque, and then the other ones it won't. Usually I'll sort of do that as like an amendment of like, oops, something rendered incorrectly, and I need to go back and like fix this. So I'll just sort of tweak my set, make a new layer, and like tweak the settings to render out whatever I need. But that's pretty much that. Are there any questions on that or other random questions? Okay, cool. I'm actually kind of surprised I remember how to do that. All right, so really quick, I just wanted to go through and again sort of show you a few more different things about outdoor light setups. I know a lot of you guys are sort of doing that in the scene. Really quick, just also for grins, I did make for another random personal project these. Yes, I can't open PNGs. I made some weird leaf stamps. So if you guys ever want to make your own brush alphas for ZBrush or whatever, you can do that. Again, I just drew this in Photoshop, and now I can just stamp leaves onto, you know, whatever. Kind of weird, fun thing. If you guys, I don't know if I mentioned this, so by default, ZBrush is set to dots for your stroke, which is just going to draw a crap ton of leaves. If that's not the functionality you want, in which case I find it kind of confusing, you can switch it to drag rectangle, which basically allows you to click and then it'll put, you can drag and sort of rotate your leaf, just give you like a little bit more customized placement of whatever you're doing. Anywho, that was just like a weird sort of side thing because I had it there. But I did want to show you, so last week I did some bits about here's how to make nice trees, but they're kind of high poly trees. So I just wanted to touch on cards a little bit and sort of the different things that you can use with cards or do with cards to make them potentially more functional than, or like if you, like I said, if you need something like grass, you don't want 8 bajillion polys in grass, so you can use cards to make nicer looking grass or tree branches or bushes. This is good for games, obviously, also good for sort of low poly assets in the back of animations, or if you need like potted plants or something in your scene, or roses, actually, it would be great for roses. So what I'm going to do is just take this, make this a less absurdly dense card, rotate that, and I will just freeze transformations on this. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and sort of work in Arnold. The process for setting up a card in Arnold versus Redshift is pretty much the same. Ditto for Unity. I think there's actually fewer steps for Unity. So what I'm going to do is just go through. So the basic premise of a card is I'm just going to use this leaf pattern that I downloaded, but I'm just going to sort of stamp that leaf pattern basically onto this, piece of geometry, and then so like all the detail is coming in from the texturing rather than the geometry itself. So what you'd want to do is, if you're in Arnold, go down once you make a standard surface shader to this geometry tab, and this is where you will find opacity. This, if you are making a card, is where you want to put your alpha or your transparency. Do not put it in transmission, or else it'll treat the clear parts as glass, which is presumably not what you want. So what you should be able to do, let me actually just download really quick Hang on. Download. So I'm just going to go ahead and map in a file texture. Again, I'm just going to use my leaves because I don't have grass floating around randomly. Downloads. All right. So we have a leaf texture. This doesn't do anything particularly interesting by default. So if we get a render out. So again, here's right now is just our card in Unity. It looks pretty not great. Obviously has no transparency on it. Don't forget that for some reason in Arnold, you need to go and manually tell each object that it needs to be transparent. So if you go into your P-plane shape node under the Arnold tab and just uncheck opaque, it should show up like a delightful little leaf. That's honestly the basic premise behind making cards. You just sort of like I don't even have a color mapped into this, it's literally only transparency. And then you can just sort of populate this. So with, one quad worth of polys, we have this nice looking leaf. And you'll notice that it casts, pretty decent looking shadows and stuff like that on the ground. Arnold, I think, mercifully does a thing. So I'm just going to go in and, purely for fun, show you some sort of silly, I don't want to make a real texture for things, kind of like how to make textures for things. So like if you put a ramp on this, for example, you could make a little bit of like a weird diagonal ramp from the other way. Whatever. But you can sort of like add texturing like this if you just wanted to make like different shades of green. Just for a little bit of extra variation in your stuff, again, if you wanted to. Better texturing would be preferable, but this will do in a pinch or for like really far away objects. And then if you wanted to, you could also add in some noise to this so that your leaf sort of blended a little bit better into each other and had like a little bit more of like a modeled texture to it. So again, you can see, this is clearly just like a green plane. The transparency, unfortunately, usually only comes in during render time. So it will look completely ridiculous until you render your stuff. But that is, again, basic premise of a card. It doesn't really matter what you do to the outside of this, as long as you have that transparency mapped in. Usually it sort of goes fairly straightforward. The one thing every once in a while that will happen is, okay. So here we have Arnold doing the thing where it makes everything obscenely shiny. So if I'm just tacking this leaf onto this sphere, again, I'll go ahead and make that transparent. You can see that sometimes it will do a weird thing where, see where I'd find a good angle of it, but like sometimes the reflections show up on areas that they shouldn't show up. This one is actually behaving pretty nicely. But if you ever do get that, you can see there's like that little specular highlight right here on the tip of this leaf. If that ever extends off of, where you've put your alpha, you might just need to go in and add some additional meshes, or additional maps, basically using that alpha to sort of turn off specular highlights. I do find Arnold to be pretty good about just sort of doing that on its own. Some of the other render engines aren't that nice and sort of forgiving with that. But this is, again, basically a card. Does anybody have any questions about this? Okay. So once you have a card, again, this I'm just using for like one giant leaf. You could make giant tufts of grass with cards. That works really nicely. So you can put like, a bunch of different types of grass, some like little wildflower cards, and just fill those through your whole scene. So what I do a lot is I go through and you can use Mash to populate your grass with cards. So if we just grab this little ground plane here, very questionable. All right, and do that. We can just, again, sort of set up a really, really quick Mash with this. I went through this last week, so I'm just going to kind of do it quickly. Feel free to stop me if you have questions. But just pop into the distribute, again, set this to mesh, and grab the ground plane and dump that in. And now we should have some super goofy little leaves that are just sort of on our ground. Ah, gorgeous. Okay, this is another one of those things where We told the original object to be transparent, but we didn't tell the object Mash generated to be transparent. Once we do, now we have a ground covered in random leaves just sticking up into the air, weirdly. So this is all fine and dandy. It does, you can kind of see it breaks down if you get to like certain angles, like this. Your grass disappears. That could be solved one of two ways. The way that I find sort of easiest is just add a random node to this. Again, turn off the position and just set the rotation Y up really... Set rotation Y up pretty high. I'm going to also make this thing larger so we can actually see, oh god. So you can see the leaves. But what that should do is at least create enough sort of variation in your scene so that depending on, which way you're actually sort of looking at this, there's always going to be some grass or some cards visible. In this case, it seems to be behaving a little bit oddly, but kind of run with that for now. So that's, again, sort of quickest, easiest way to do things is just like make a field of grass and make it slightly random in the way that it is rotating. The other thing you can do, and I have mixed success with this. It'll work for like 2 seconds and then it'll break. It's kind of frustrating sometimes, but like it should theoretically work. Is using this orient node. And basically what this is going to do, if we add this in here, it gives you a few different options. So we have aim at target, velocity, which these aren't moving, so that doesn't really matter, and orient to mesh. Orient to mesh, in my opinion, behaves really, really similarly to the mash distribute node, so I usually don't use that too much. What we want is aim at target. And if you look and you scroll down, there's this little like option for aim at target, and it's basically like, hey, plug a target in. What this is going to do is theoretically point all of these little planes at whatever you plug in. So if we grab our perspective camera and we plug that in, theoretically, it will point all of your planes at your perspective camera. So that the basic premise being, if you rotate around this, you can kind of see, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see that all of the planes are sort of like tilting with the camera and like actively rotating. This could be, pretty jarring, honestly, which is, I don't know if I'd really use this very often. You can see the shadows turning, honestly, like more than the actual planes. There are some settings, shiny leaves. There are some settings you can play with, like messing with how sort of the different axes you actually want it to be rotating on. So in this case, it seems like playing with the turning basically Y off and X and Z on gives a little bit more of the effect we want, where the cards are actually standing up in the air. And you can see again, as we rotate these, they are sort of following. See, this is where it breaks down, is like sometimes it works and then you like turn things on and then it doesn't work. So this is like very much one of those weird things where like I had this working really nicely on my computer last night and then all of a sudden I changed something and then even though I set it back, it just kind of like broke. But theoretically, this is another way you could use to sort of change your animations. You could also use this, if you were so inclined, as a way to sort of make almost like a rippling effect on your grass. So if we go ahead into the orient node and we plug in this P sphere instead of the camera itself, you'll notice that it wraps all of the planes very, very aggressively sort of around the sides, but if we move this, it makes this still really weird kind of jarring effect. But it could be, an interesting way if you're ever trying to like recreate a wave in a stadium, or just, again, sort of like weird effects of this. Actually, you know what this would be great for? Sucking hair up a vacuum. This is exactly what that looks like. But that is an option if you ever need to sort of, do something like that. Obviously, then you could sort of go through and like play with the different camera angles and stuff like that to achieve more of the effect that you were looking at. There's also strength of this, so maybe you don't want it to be super aggressive, just like a gentle sort of wiggling, waving motion. You can mess with that. And you can also play with this has some built-in randomness to it. So you'll notice, like, if you turn that off, it actually doesn't work at all, which is kind of weird. Otherwise, it'll sort of add, like, slight variation to the rotation of your planes. So that's the orient node. Again, I don't use it a lot. I find, like, whenever I use it, it kind of gets glitchy. But if you can make it work, it is quite powerful for doing some weird sort of, like, blowing grass effects or things like that. You could also use this and set up maybe, like, a few different mashes. So if you had different types of grass, you could have different little aims and then have them slightly, moving slightly off sync from each other, so it was like a little bit more of a natural effect. That's my weird bit on imagine if this, instead of being leaves, was grass. But does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. So sort of building on that, I wanted to show you like a few other things that you can do with cards besides grass. So I think grass, if you're doing something outdoors, I highly recommend card grass over like poly paint actual mesh grass, because that will explode your scene, whereas cards will not explode your scene, theoretically, unless you put like 8,000 of them in. But there are some other stuff you can do with cards. Most of that involves doing stuff like bushes. Bush, branch. So if you can make your own, or what did I just type in? Designation? Okay. So like you could find, something like this. And if we go ahead and just sort of, there was a better branch thing I found last night. But basically what you can do is just sort of make like clusters of things like this, and sure. All right, so I'm just going to assign this a new material. Again, I'll just make it an Arnold material. Basically what you can do is clump a bunch of different cards together so that you have something that looks like a sort of three-dimensional object. It's like effectively making grass, but on like a much smaller scale. This is delightful. This is really common to do in something like a video game, if you need, bushes or trees or things like that. It's also not uncommon to sort of make it's alive, to sort of make trees based on, there we go. Well, that looks ridiculous. But if we do sort of this, and again, you can just sort of like rotate this around. Just if you're doing a bush in particular, make sure that when you rotate your object, the pivot sort of lines up with the bottom of your bush, or else it's going to look really strange. You can, maybe scale some of these a little bit differently. But theoretically, this should be enough if we plugged in alpha to get you something that looks vaguely sort of bushy as you're looking at it. So what I'm going to do is just go through and mesh combine these purely because I don't feel like clicking the stupid opaque button 4 times. And I will go through and again just assign the same file to this as an alpha. It's going to be a little bit weird since it's not a black and white image. And unhide my sky dome light. Where am I going? Render. And we have janky bush that is reversed. So in this case, if you guys ever need to flip the basically like inverted image, there is a button to do that in Maya. So if we go into where you load the image, scroll down to effects, and there's a little button for invert. I'm just going to use that. But you'll see we have this really goofy bush here. And even though it's the same image over and over, it looks a lot sort of richer than the original bush. And as you rotate around this, it pretty much always seems like it has some kind of dimension to it. So this is effectively like janky little card bush. If you wanted to, obviously you could add some leaves to this or like do different things to that. But that is something that you can do to sort of get yourself a lot more, like with pretty much 8 or 9 polys, you have a bush that looks pretty bushy from all angles. So that is something to be aware of that you can do. Again, this also works really, really beautifully for things like, put a stupid ground plane in here. It works really great for stuff like plants. If you ever need to make like a bushy fern or other weird stuff like that, you can do that with the pretty much same method that you did here. The other thing you can do, and again, I'll just, I hate auto creation. I'm just gonna run through this like super fast. It's all sort of like vague ideas that are like pretty similar to each other in terms of the card stuff specifically. But what you can do is also rotate stuff. So if you needed to make something, for example, like lettuce, if you search lettuce leaf, it is amazing how many people have just like scanned pictures of lettuce. Like it's truly ridiculous. So we can just grab this and use this to make lettuce. So this sort of covers a little bit like flowers or like anything rounded. So cards don't always need to be flat. I did the one on the sort of sphere earlier. But one thing you can do, again, to add a little bit more dimension to your cards is do something like this and just make them ever so slightly bent. Add a new material to this. Oh my god, standard surface. So again, just for grins, I'll turn off opacity just because I know I don't need that opaque and I'm there. I will show you what happens if you map this crazy lettuce texture into the transmission weight instead of the opacity. It is pretty strange. It'll sort of give you like this weird glassy effect for that. In this case, it's like behaving a little bit oddly. Probably because I don't have alpha's luminance checked. Yeah. So if you check alpha's luminance, you can see like this kind of gives you an effect, but it's also like treating this like frosted glass over here, which is not what you want, obviously. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sort of rehook that up in my hypershade. And in case you guys, this is just like a weird texture note. If you find yourself importing the same texture like 8,000 times, what you can do is go into your hypershade and actually it has all of the textures that you pulled in here. So if you're importing the same thing and you find like, again, you've loaded this lettuce texture like 50 times, you probably don't need to do that. And what you can do is just come down and actually just click on this file and like drag it into whatever channel you're trying to map it into. So it'll basically use the same file instead of, again, pulling it in like 8 different times. So in this case, I'm just going to go grab this file and just drag it onto the opacity. And that should give us, theoretically, maybe not. It should have given me a nice looking lettuce texture. Where? Blur. In this case, for some reason it wasn't working, so I'm just going to reload this lettuce. All right. All right, this might just be a weird thing where I need to refresh the render thing. All right. Great. I actually don't really know why that's not working. Oh, wait. I actually bet I do. Hang on. I have a strange feeling that in this I probably, yeah. Oh, okay, great. So I had when I unmapped the transmission weight, it left it turned to glass, which is why that wasn't showing up. So now we have a really janky little lettuce. If we wanted to, we could go in and mess with the exposure of this. This is definitely better to sort of just do in Photoshop or like make a better map for this. But you can do some really weird sort of like basic edits to your sketchy lettuce in this way if you want to. But anywho, so basically what you'd want to do from this point on is just sort of like duplicate this little lettuce and sort of stack it on top of each other. And by the time you're done, again, this is going to be like a really janky demo, but you do get, with relatively few polys, a fairly nice dynamic looking plant. And this also works really, really nicely for flowers. So if you wanted, in the case of flowers, I just chose lettuce because like theoretically it was easier. You could set up a flower manually, or what you could do is go into Polypaint, have it generate you a flower. Because when you do that, it's basically like if we look at these flowers, something, for example, like this dahlia. Basically what it gives you is a crap ton of little cards. Like all of these are just cards. So if you converted this to a mesh and like tweak the UVs a little bit, you should be able to basically just throw a random texture for a petal on there and it will automatically map in your petal texture. So that might also work for something really nicely like this daisy. Maybe not. But again, still basically just like different card textures. So you can use these custom textures to make these poly paint flowers look a lot nicer. You can give them leaves that look way more natural than these sort of little cube things. And the other really, really nice thing, if you go onto textures.com and you search for flowers, some poor person has literally gone through and just scanned a crap ton of flower petals. So you could literally just like grab this whole thing and be like, great, now I have like 50 different versions of magnolia petals. They come with bump maps, all of this stuff, and then they come with alphas. So you could plug all of this stuff in and have like a really nice pre-made looking flower just by using different cards, and you could even pick, you know, the different petals that you like for stuff if you wanted to. That's pretty much my weird bit on cards. I have like one more goofy thing I want to show you with cards, but I'll get to that in a minute. Does anyone have questions on setting them up or anything else you might want to use them for? All right. Also works delightfully for hair. But anywho. All right, so this is our super janky scene that we have. I just wanted to sort of touch on like the most common, like 3 sort of really basic ways to light an outdoor scene. Since I had like 1 or 2 people specifically interested in that, so I was like, by 1 or 2 I actually mean like 13. So I just wanted to touch on that really quick. So basic thing you can do in Arnold is a sky dome light, and this is, if you do not put an HDRI into this, they look terrible, and you should pretty much, in my opinion, almost never use these to light your scenes. You'll notice, like, if you look at this, for one, everything is really, really washed out and, like, pretty gross looking because it's just this white light coming from all directions. The shadows are pretty much non-existent. So if you ever want to use one of these without an HDRI, I would suggest sort of 2 things. One, tint it some color. Like, make it, outdoor light is not pure white. So make it, you know, a little bit orange. If you wanted to, you could use color temperature. 6500 is like kind of bluier, but like you can tint it this way. But like tint your light a color. And the other thing I would suggest, and this is personal preference, is take the intensity way down. Use this as sort of like a fill light to ensure that, you know, nothing falls completely into shadow. And then I would want to go in, if I was using this again without an HDRI, and add in just like some area lights and make that basically like the sun, a stand-in for the sun effectively. Really? Cool. So for that, like again, I just made an area light. I'm going to take the exposure and I'm just going to bump it like way the heck up. I actually have no idea where this light is coming from. I probably need to refresh my scene. Cool. Exposure 50. Okay, that'll do it. Hey. But basically, like, make your own sun point and then just sort of like work from there. So usually for outdoor lighting, if we're talking about sort of generic sunny day, we're looking at, you know, one main source of light that's either the sun or the moon, depending on what time of day it is. And then some like manual bounce lights you'd probably go back in and add later. So the disadvantage of doing this particular light setup with the area light is I am getting this like really weird sort of harsh line on the side of my scene. So that is just like a thing you want to be aware of. Part of that is actually just the ground texture, I realized. But again, you can basically set up like your own sort of sun like this if you want. I don't really recommend doing this, honestly. I used to do stuff like this. It's kind of a pain. There's better tools for this. So that's janky version of outdoor lighting that you probably never want to do. Other thing you could do is just grab an HDRI texture and throw this into here. I assume that like pretty much everyone knows how to do that at this point. Does anybody want to just go over HDRI textures again? Okay. I'm pretty sure, yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I feel like everyone probably knows how to do that, but basically you just download, just make sure it's like an HDRI file or like a file with lots of information. So like an EXR, HDRI, places like HDRI Haven have them online. If it's a JPEG, it's not really going to work nicely. It'll work, it'll just look terrible. But you would just throw that into your color and it would just automatically map on, you know, whatever stuff from your scene and light it really nicely. So that is sort of like the second option. Things to be aware of with HDRIs, if every once in a while they will render really, really hideously. So if it's like a really, really low res texture or something like that, usually what I'll do is sort of use them for lighting and then just turn off their visibility so they don't render, and I can sub in my own background in the scene. Because there's nothing that's kind of like breaks the illusion of your piece more than having like this really blurry, hyper-realistic, random image in the back of your scene that is your sad HDRI. So just be aware of that. It's pretty much just a matter of, like, again, turning off visibility. The other sort of third type of lighting, and this is usually what I prefer apart from an area light, unless I'm going to put an HDRI in, is this physical sky here. So this is actually a thing that also exists in Unity and pretty much I think most game engines. If we look around, the thing that kind of makes me sad is like a lot of times it doesn't fill in below the ground, which is a little annoying. But basically what this does is it makes a fake sky. So you'll notice that like there's a tiny sun. Maybe I should just make this bigger. So there's like a little tiny sun kicking around. You get a little bit of variation in like the color of the sky, and you can customize a lot of these settings. So you can go through, there's like, you know, sort of, if you play with turbidity, it kind of gives you like a more sort of like murky gradient at the bottom. You can play, honestly, I just usually go through and like play with a lot of these settings. You can do some like really disgusting effects if you're going for like polluted environments. Honestly, usually I kind of do just go through and like randomly scroll with these values. So in this case, like the azimuth, I don't know how you say that, but this is going to kind of change the position of the sun in the sky. So it'll sort of, if you need your sun rotated a different direction, this is usually how you'd go through and sort of change that. Elevation of the sun. So the cool thing about elevation that I'm like really, really a fan of is you'll notice it's actually doing like a sunset effect. So like here the sky is like really blue and nice, and then it comes down and it's like, oh look, we're getting all red and gross and like sunsetty. So that's kind of like an interesting thing. And then when your sun goes below the horizon, this is pretty much as far down as you can take it, but like it gets like really, really dim. So it's pretty cool to be able to sort of like dynamically simulate that. If you ever needed to show like the passage of time in your scene, or characters idling, you could keyframe a few of these things and like just do, you know, you'd have like really, really obvious sort of shadow change throughout your scene. So I really like them for stuff like that. Honestly, I think the physical sky is delightful. There are some other settings that you can go into somewhere. Wait, Skydome light. There I go. Oh no, sorry, that was pretty much the settings. They'll also, if you click into your Skydome light, so you have the same like intensity and stuff like that that you normally would for your lighting. You know, different exposure, sampling, all that stuff. The settings for the Skydome itself are actually just in the color, so that's where you find all this stuff. But I think, I don't know, if you're going for like generic render setup, and you're like, I only want to put a light in, I don't want to deal with file textures, use a physical sky over a dome light. They look a lot nicer, they have better shadowing, the light color looks a little more natural. Again, the only sort of downside with these is they do make this giant black area. Basically what that is it's just not having light shining up through your ground, if that makes sense. So when you throw in a dome light, like everything is white, which is why you have no shadows. It's just giant softbox, whereas this doesn't have that. So you do need to find ways to sort of like cover up that transition into the ground. So maybe that's just, you know, adding some hills so you don't see it, adding some fences, but like you definitely want to make sure that, again, you don't see this giant hideous black void. The other option that you can do is, again, if you decide, and this also works for HDRIs, same process, if you decide you actually don't want this light to render for whatever reason, if you click it and you go into the, where is it? Oh. Aha. Theoretically? No. Wait. What? Question mark. What? Oh. That's actually weird. There is a button somewhere. For some reason, I am completely forgetting where it is right now. But there's a button where you can just turn this off and it just like won't render by default. So you get all the lighting and stuff from it. It just, you won't see that sort of black area if you're seeing. So if you wanted to, again, sub in your own lighting, put in your own sort of sky plane or something like that, you could do that. Again, why I can't find that, I'm not entirely sure, but somewhere there's a setting for that. Anyway. That's effectively the 3 different types of lighting. Anyone have any questions on those? All right. There's like 2 more things that I wanted to show you just like really, really quickly. And then probably we'll just sort of like break into Open Lab. One of them, and this is, in my opinion, super obscenely comically important, is portal lights. If you are ever, and this is not for an outdoor scene, but this is like if you are rendering an indoor scene with, okay, why am I rendering in the background? So if you're rendering like an indoor scene like this, and let's just make a super janky, awful window in here. Die. Okay, great. We have our sad window. If you are doing something like, again, like this, where, let's make a, great, cool, all right, sad room. If you are rendering from inside this room and you are lighting your scene with a portal light or an HDRI or like whatever random stuff you have in here, and your stuff, you know, it looks really grainy for whatever reason, portal lights are pretty much the answer to fixing that. So I'm just going to bump up the exposure of this light like a lot to see if we can get some more resolution here. So I've turned this light up really, really bright, an exposure of 5. And you'll notice that this is taking significantly longer to render than it was previously, and it's also obscenely sampley. This is happening, so pretty much anytime, again, if you're doing an indoor scene with a physical sky or any kind of giant globe light, you want to use a portal light in conjunction with this window. What's happening now is this light is still, it's rendering light from everywhere, and you really don't need that. So this is trying to render the light that's like coming in from, you know, behind this wall, and all you really need is this window here. So shadows are usually the most computationally intensive thing to render, apart from stuff like super shiny glass, as well as usually like the noisiest thing. Like if you're gonna have noise in something, it's probably in your shadows. So calculating fewer shadows, if you can do that, will speed up your renders and also probably make things less sampley. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add a portal light into here. I will look through selected on that portal light and dump it somewhere in the vicinity of this window. And I will put that better position. So usually if you're doing a portal light, you can just sort of like line it up kind of with your window like that and just be like, great, it's a light. Also, fun tidbit, Alt-Z will undo your last camera move if you ever move a camera that you accidentally didn't want to move. Yeah, Alt-Z is delightful. So if we go ahead and we render this now, I'll just sort of select this little side piece here and re-render that. You can see it's rendered significantly faster than it has before, and it's also way less sampley. So if we look at this, like new light with portal light compared to old light, infinitely faster, and like it's still a little noisy, but it's way better than it was before. So I definitely want to go in and still play with my light settings and stuff because it's a little bit dark right now. If you do need to play with your light settings with the portal light, you do that in the light itself and not through like the portal light. Oh God, the portal light doesn't really have any settings. It just sort of exists basically as a channel, like punching that light into, you know, wherever the portal light exists. But yeah, so again, portal lights will totally save you probably lots of render time if you're doing shadows and stuff like that. I always have someone like asking about that and be like, why is my scene super samply? And I'm like, portal lights usually will fix that. And it's also usually a good idea. So like this one is like a little bit far away from the window. Like if I punch that even closer, that might actually make the render time even less. It also makes the room a little bit brighter. But yeah, portal lights for the win. They're great. This is like a million times less sampley than it was previously. That's pretty much that. Anyone have any weird questions on that? Yes.
One. So did you like link them up, or did you just make the portal light and automatically work?
It automatically does it. So you can.
Did you have multiples?
Yes. You can put in a bajillion portal lights. You don't even need a window. You could put a portal light inside your room. Wait, before I say that, I'm fairly certain that you can just put a portal light in your room like a crazy person, but now I'm actually curious. But yeah, it'll automatically link it up to whatever sort of dome light or whatever you have in here. Okay, so perhaps you cannot put a portal light just in the middle of your room. That will still be grumpy. So it does expect to have, if there's something blocking, you know, between the portal light and your sky dome light, apparently it will not work. Never tried to do that before. But if you did, you know, you could put like a sky dome or something, or like a ceiling window in, and like that would solve that issue. But yeah, it automatically hooks it up. The only way, if you have like a portal light in your scene, pretty much if you wanted to have the light other things, you would either need to add other giant portal lights into your scene to just sort of like, hey, project it from here, or you would have to turn off the portal light. But yeah, it is a fairly automatic process for once in Maya. Yep.
Are those also in Redshift?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they work the same way?
Yeah. Yes, so also in Redshift, pretty much lighting in Arnold and Redshift is like the same. They all have, Redshift also has physical skies, light portals, other stuff like that. So yeah, lighting for once is actually pretty similar. I did mention earlier, the one thing that makes me very, very happy about Redshift is you can change the shape of your area light. So like, Arnold only has this like square, a cylinder, or a disc. Disc probably would be like the closest to a street lamp or something like that, but Redshift actually has an option for a spotlight. So if you're ever really, really in love with like the default crappy Maya spotlight, which will always have a place in my heart as like the only light I use to render, I would use Redshift because they actually recreate that spotlight effect where you can, you know, have that like little point light basically with like the spread. Sadly, Arnold doesn't have that. But yeah, that is a weird bit on lighting. I did want to show you one more really goofy thing that you can do with clouds. And that is basically just making card clouds like a crazy person. It actually works really, really nicely. So I'm just gonna like make this giant thing here and assign it a new material. Do the exact same thing I've done before, so just go through and again add into geometry a little file texture. And I think I've downloaded, no. I just have some pre-downloaded random cloud images that I brought in, so I didn't need to find them. So, cloud. And we have a delightful, hideous cloud. The kind of cool thing about clouds is this way you don't need, like they're almost never, unless you're doing How to Train Your Dragon, you will never need to be inside a cloud. So there's no reason to really sim these unless you absolutely have to. You could go into Photoshop and just like make yourself, where am I going? Oh my God. You could just make yourself like a bunch of different random versions of clouds. Ooh, God. And that is what happens when you turn the exposure of your light up to 7. And you have a janky little cloud. In this case, it's rendering like the background is like being green because I think of the color in the alpha I added, but it does give you this goofy little cloud. You can, it looks pretty decent if you move it around your sky, and if you wanted to, you could do sort of like mimic the sort of traditional 2D animation thing where they'll go through and like have parallax on stuff. So you could make, a few different rings of clouds or a few different shapes of clouds, and then have them moving at different speeds or something like that to sort of enhance the look of whatever you're doing in your scene. So you can see again, we just have some like really goofy clouds. Obviously a little variation would be nice in these, but like whatever for a demo. So if you're looking for cheap, easy clouds that you don't want to bake into your sky, totally recommend doing this. It also works really nicely with the physical sky because whatever you do to this, like it'll change the background automatically and leave the clouds where they are. Right, so like if we ran like a sunset through this, again, it's getting like a little weird and green, but like the clouds still exist in your scene. So it can potentially save you a little bit of editing and stuff like that later. Other weird thing, again, if you just like, I'm always a fan of procedurally texturing stuff in Maya, partly because I suck at using Photoshop. True story, I never saw Photoshop opened before the like first class in college where they teach you Photoshop and Illustrator. I'm like, my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Like Microsoft Paint. But one thing you can do for clouds is to map in just like a little, is to map in a ramp. So if you ever, this is again my mania with like texturing everything in Maya. I'd like to find, okay, there we go. The delightful green. But you'll notice like as we sort of play with this, you can see how the ramp is like moving across my bush, the clouds. So we can change the texture of this and make a little bit of like variation in the cloud color if we wanted, maybe do like a darker shadowing or something like that on the bottom that goes like yellow at the top. Again, I'm just sort of ignoring the fact that this is green for now. But what you can do is then even go in and map in case you didn't know, you can like map in other things to ramps and checker textures so that there's even more sort of variation there. I've decided this is actually really annoying me, so I'm just going to turn the sky slightly, and now we have better clouds. Yeah. All right, so we do this. Again, we can map in if we wanted something like a noise texture into the selected color on here, and that will even break up sort of the top of this cloud a little bit more and give it like a sort of puffier effect. It's kind of a janky puffy effect, but it exists. And then what you can do to even break that up further is go in and add noise to your ramp. So right now we get this sort of like chunked up, weird texture where we have some like a little bit strangely dark areas up here. But it'll sort of like mix your colors together a little bit more. And this, without doing any actual Photoshop texturing or using file textures, it looks a little bit nicer than it did, 10 seconds ago. We're just going to kind of ignore the fact that my cloud is like bright blue and now green. Questionable decisions that I've done there. But yeah, I mean, that's basically cards. Probably is, I think that was pretty much all the stuff I had on sort of like lighting and texturing and like making outdoor environments kind of stuff. So we did like the terrain, the trees, and a bunch of card stuff. And also lighting. So I think if there's anything else that I wasn't planning on doing any more like surveys or whatever, but if there's anything else you guys are particularly curious about learning in this vein or just like other random stuff, feel free to shoot me an email and let me know. But yeah, that was sort of my weird bit on like clouds. That is actually pretty much all I had for you guys today. So does anybody have any questions before we sort of break into sort of like open lab, or you guys are welcome to sort of like run away? Okay. Cool. In that case, I will throw this video up on YouTube, and if you want to leave, you're welcome to.